Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well today. Today I wanted to discuss why running Curve Sword and Board in proxy also makes the Power Stance moveset better. Now, while you probably saw a ton of Bleed Bandits ran early in this game's life cycle, you don't see Curve Swords being Power Stanced all that often anymore, mostly being two-handed due to how good that moveset is. But it's unfortunate because there are a lot of really cool things that you can do with the Power Stance moveset. It just takes a lot of work to get there due to their lack of range, and also their very strange amounts of poise damage. But I want to discuss how the one-handed moveset has just the right qualities to make it stand out a lot more. Now, as you can probably expect, the L1s of your standing power stanced moveset are going to do split poise damages between all of your different attacks. So for the first L1, you hit twice, as you do with a power stance setup usually. So they start at frame 15 for the first swing and 17 for the second. That's not particularly great, considering that power stance straight swords, for example, are going to have better range, and the first hit starts a frame faster than that. But anyway, the poise damage of the first hit is 101.1, whereas the second part of that first L1 isn't even doing 28 poise damage, doing 27.6. Now, the reason this is significant is that you're going to come across players very frequently that have more than 110 poise. The max that you can have is 133 if you're running Bull Goat Talisman with either full Bull Goat or Verdigris. And then there's a lot of very common armors that easily reach that amount, such as Fire Prelati, for example. So that's a bit of a rough start. It is interesting that the first instance of damage on that L1 is going to be doing the majority of the poise damage, but that changes for the rest of the L1 moveset. So your second L1 is actually quite fast. It is frame 12, which is very quick, and the first hit is actually going to pretty much do the inverse of what we just saw with the first one. The first hit is going to do 27.6, and then the second one does 100.1. So this is kind of the trend you see, is that other than that first L1, generally speaking, your poise damages are going to be backloaded. And that is also quite apparent when it comes to your running L1. So the running L1, very scary, does a lot of damage, but it's very slow. It's frame 18, which is slower than a lot of attacks in the game. And the first hit only does 64.22 poise damage. So the important part of this is that a lot of people have more than 65 poise. The second hit does a measly 16.1, and then the last two attacks are going to do 23 and 91.75. The thing that makes this difficult is that you're not always going to land all four of these hits. Obviously, if you were to combine them all together, you would be poise breaking the beefiest of players before factoring in hyper armor, but that doesn't happen very frequently. Now, where the shield comes into this is making the curve sword pretty hard to be able to punish, while also being able to build up just enough poise damage that we can then swap to the power stanced moveset and be able to land our damage with a lot more efficacy. So the interesting thing that came from patch 1.12 is that the majority of medium-sized weapons, such as curved swords, katanas, straight swords, are going to do 110 poise damage on the first R1, and then they are going to do not quite, but a little bit close to half that much poise damage for the second swing. So in the case of the curved sword, what you're looking at is a frame 15 R1 that does 110 on the first hit, and then the second hit is going to be 67.5. Considering that both of these are very realistically tankable, you're going to find it kind of difficult to mount a great offense and also just keep people off of you if it were just a one-handed curved sword that you're using. But the shield is going to let us get in and out of range much more safely, allowing us to run in on our opponent, making it to where we don't really have a problem rolling things too early, because we can just hold our shield up, back up, which makes it to where kick is almost guaranteed to not land if someone swaps to kick, and then we can just reaction roll pretty much everything that they do. It's also very effective against blender setups, such as the crouch attacks from, say, PSGS, for example. They're going to have a very hard time keeping you in their sort of like little L1 chain if you're able to back up and just block and get out. So, despite our low poise damages on the one-handed curved sword, we're going to be able to land it with a lot more efficacy due to this added safety from the shield. And then once we have gauged the poise damages, we can swap back to the power stanced moveset. So the thing is that if you see that your opponent tanks the first R1, which, reminder, is 110 poise damage, that means that at most what they can have left is 23, and all of those L1 moves that I mentioned earlier do more than 23 on the first hit. So if you're fighting someone in full bull goats, for example, you can hit them with a single R1 or running R1 from the curved sword and board setup, if you will, and then you can swap over to the power stance and pretty much use anything that you want. Now, it does get complicated with phantom hits, because poise damage is done through phantom hits, even if you didn't do physical damage. So if you're fighting someone you have a lot of latency to, you have to account for that. If you get a phantom hit when you swap over to the power stance moveset, and it breaks it effectively if they were to have been hit, then their poise just got reset, and you're going to need to get back into breaking it with the first sort of step of our game plan, which is the curved sword and board sort of setup. So that's the big thing, and then also trying to make sure that we make good use of our backswing when we are one-handing or two-handing the curved sword. So, you know, obviously two-handed curved sword's amazing. The backswing of two-handed is going to do about 87.5, if I'm not mistaken, poise damage. And if you're one-handing it, the backswing is going to do 67.5. Both of these numbers are relevant because when you swap back over to the power stance moveset, a lot of those aforementioned things will still be able to break on the first hit. So, for example, say the jumping L1. The jumping L1 on paper looks like it's going to be fantastic, and then it just doesn't poise break people and has really small amounts of range, stuff like that. But the first hit of the power stanced jump L1 is on frame 8 once you press the button, which is very fast. Frame 8 is very fast. That first hit takes 97 poise to be able to tank, though, which, like I said, most people are running more than 97 poise. Now, it's a bit of a mess when it comes to the poise values of the the power stanced attacks that hit 4 times with a single button press, like your running attacks and your jumping attacks. For the jumping attack, it's 96.25, 96.25 for those first 2 hits, and then 110 and 110 for the latter 2 hits of the jump attack. If any one of those hits and it doesn't poise break, most likely they have jumped out of what you're doing, or rolled out more so. And then when it comes to the power stance L1, once again, you're looking at 64.22, 16.1, very little poise damage on that, 23, and the final hit's doing 91.75. I'm reading it over here on the side. It's an absolute disaster of poise damages. It is very all over the place. But the important part of all this is that this little sort of like step 1 to our game plan allows us to essentially unmuddy the waters almost, because you have all these disastrous numbers that you're never going to remember most likely, but if you land an R1 and it doesn't break their poise, then all you need to know is that assuming they don't reset their poise with hyper armor, your next hit with the power stance setup will break, which is extremely good. Now, some other things of advice that I would recommend if you're going to use this setup is that regardless of which curved swords you've chosen to use. If they are infusible, I recommend that you use one of the status infusions, whether that be bleed or frostbite. And the reason why is because with all of those really fast hits and very crunched down hits that are in the power stance running L1 and jumping L1, if you're running a status, it makes it a lot more consistent on latency. Most times on latency, frostbite and bleed actually suffer quite a bit because someone will roll the hit that procs the status, and while it takes them out of the roll, it doesn't actually do the damage. But due to how fast all of these 4 hits happen on those power stanced attacks I was talking about, what will very commonly happen is that if they're very close to getting frostbitten or bled, and they get phantom hit and bleed procced or frost procced with the first 2 hits of, say, the power stance jump attack or running attack, it will true combo into the latter 2, which is where the majority of the damage is coming from anyway. So, and it also just helps a ton against hyper armor. Bleed and Frostbite are able to shear through someone's hyper armor, making it to where they will stagger from that even if they were not going to stagger from just your base attacks. And this is very helpful because something that people are oftentimes going to do when you're using small weapons is they're going to mash out of hit stun. Unfortunately, we play a game where mashing out of hit stun is very commonly the most optimal thing to do, but at least in the case of curved swords, whether it be on latency or on good lat, the little status proc is going to help you out a ton in sort of averting that issue. Another very important thing to making this setup work quite well is going to be running a Ash of War hard swap, or soft swap I reckon, that will allow you to punish boluses. So if you're going to go with status, people are often going to go for a bolus to keep from getting frostbitten or bled. And so what's really helpful, based on what your build is, go with a weapon very close by that you can soft swap or hard swap to that has a quick projectile. Say like Stormblade or Thunderbolt. Beast's Roar is especially good due to how fast it is. And as they're going for that proc, you will be able to get some guaranteed damage, which is very valuable. It's especially valuable on Frostbite because a lot of people will use the bolus after they've been frostbitten because it still gives like a damage debuff and whatnot, as an incoming damage for them is debuffed. So you definitely want to make good use of a projectile in your pocket. I also found that this setup works very well if you run a Twin Blade as a hard swap nearby. Now, essentially the Twin Blade is the premier poise counting weapon, and when you add together everything that we've talked about in terms of making the power stance moveset work, that also helps make the Twin Blade much better due to its first hits of almost everything not breaking poise. So yeah, and it's also a fantastic rundown weapon. For some reason, people never use it as such, but it does have a phenomenal couple of running attacks to be able to hit people if you're having a hard time hitting them with, say, your power stanced running L1, for example. So you definitely want to have something with a very consistent running attack, whether that be swapping to the two-handed curved sword or something that has its own benefits like Twin Blade or even Heavy Thrusting Sword. Heavy Thrusting Sword is a very good swap if someone's trying to play really far away. And that's kind of also the biggest problem with this setup, other than having to account for its poise damages, is that sure, you do all this damage, sure, it's very scary if you get a proc, but oftentimes people are going to neglect or they're going to abuse the fact you don't have very good forward momentum. So having something nearby that has good forward momentum, whether you choose to hard swap to something or to swap to two-handed, is very good. You definitely want to consider doing that for this build. Another very big boon to this setup is swapping between two of the exact same shield. So essentially, it is very threatening to have the idea of a parry to be able to use against your opponent. It makes them play very differently. Maybe they'll be going for more jump attacks than they would otherwise. Maybe they'll go for certain Ashes of War that they wouldn't under normal circumstances. The threat of a parry while you're in the curved sword and board version of the build is going to put a lot of sort of background stress on your opponent's playstyle. And having two shields that look the exact same, they're the same type, but one of them is a parry shield and one of them is an Ash of War shield, is going to be extremely beneficial to keep your opponent constantly on their toes. Now, it is worth mentioning right now that I am not using an optimal setup for this at all. Scimitars are not optimal curved swords, Shamshears are. When it comes to the offhand curved sword, the most optimal is going to be the bandits in the majority of situations, but I am obsessed with cool things that I think look cool. So if you're looking for optimal numbers for your damages and whatnot, I'm not necessarily showing them right now. For your main hand, Shamshear is the best. For your offhand, on the majority of builds, is going to be bandits. And for the best shield, normally you're going to be running the brass shield because of all the medium shields, it has the most amount of stability. But everything I'm running is because I think it looks cool, so look past that part of things. As an extension of that, the best Ash of War to run on the majority of builds is going to be Swords Dance. It gives you hyper armor as well as 2 extra hits to potentially proc on somebody. It's also going to be one of the few Ashes of War that's going to both cover a panic roll and a mash out of hit stun due to its long amount of root motion, its very high amount of forward momentum, in combination with how quickly it comes out as well as that hyper armor. What that equates to is that a lot of your damage animations are going to be level 1 damage animations. I mean, this is a medium-sized weapon, so that's to be expected. But the Swords Dance is going to be fast enough that if you hit someone with, say, an R1 or whatever, and you poise break them, and they panic roll, Swords Dance will catch them. That hyper armor, you do need a good amount of poise yourself, which is why I'm not running it right now. I do not have the poise to make Swords Dance really tank anything. You would have to be running upwards of somewhere around 90 plus to get those effects. I don't know the exact numbers, but when I run around 95, 96 poise, that's when it really starts feeling like it works, like it's supposed to. So I'm running Spinning Slash for people who roll in, as well as when I get someone up against the wall. Spinning Slash gains a lot of benefit in that area. So with that being said, those are kind of the sort of things that I was not doing optimally, but yeah, I encourage you to give this build a try. It is so interesting, and when you really grow to know all of the different numbers and whatnot, you might just find that this is super oppressive. It takes a little bit of work to get curved swords to really work power stanced, but I think that this makes them work in a very interesting way. Now, the last bit of this video is unrelated. It's just some funny stuff with my bud, so enjoy that. Thank you.
Thanks, dickhead.
I missed the first 2 times. I've been mate.
Shit. Damn, you left me in the world with an invader.
I'll put it down at Rampart.
Seriously killed him.
Mm-hmm. Right. Oh, wait, hang on. Let me do something pretty funny. Yeet! Fuck. Yeet! Yeah! Wait, he's stuck in air.
Oh, he's dead.
What the fuck? Just playing through the game.
That's awesome.
Yeah, like someone told me, bro, you just got clipped and exposed. And I was like, how? And I was like, oh, okay. Right in the fucking eye. Wait, hang on, what? It just went straight through his face. No, hang on, that ain't on me.
Obviously. How did you hit me? Oh, you're red! You're red!
No. Oh no. No. You ate my fucking swap! Yes, come to the birds. This is a very fair fight. No! You ballsy bastard. Roll in. Roll in! Roll in! Beta! Aww.
Uh-huh.
I'm better.
Fucking light.
I'm better. I'm not light rolling, actually. No! I buffed you. Oh no, I'm free aiming. I could have stomped you. No! Man, you're so bad. I was going for fucking no scopes at the end. Shitty player, horrible player.
Was that like a clever ruse you were doing, or like did you really just put your red sign down and didn't even notice?
I didn't notice until my arrow flew straight through the bird's head and did nothing.
Yeah.